this video, we're going to show you how to add virtual reality or VR to your scene. Now, this is going to be a replacement video for a former video that we made, and that's because there's kind of a new way or a better asset to use for using VR. So I'll explain better once we're actually in our editor. So let's get started. Okay, we're here in our scene. Now, the former way in the other video that we have made, and this is a much newer video of several months, and this video, the former video used Core VR as the asset pack to use for VR. Now, that still works. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that the new asset pack that we're going to show you is just much better, and so it's much more and much better recommended avenue to use VR. So let's show you how to do that. We're going to go ahead and click Import Assets. And we're going to click the VR Asset Pack. This is what we're going to start using from here on out, and it's also really what we highly recommend you use over Core VR. We are starting to communicate that this is not as good of an option as VR Asset Pack. So we highly recommend. And there's a few reasons for that, which we'll get into. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and click Add. And here's our VR Asset Pack. Before I started recording, I had actually already added it, so now you see two, but that's okay. Additionally, I have removed our host. That's one other cleanup item I did, is because as we are going through this, we don't really need the host to be talking to us and stuff, and so I just removed him. Remove Preston. Okay, so now that we have the VR Asset Pack in our scene, or a second one technically, I'm going to take the VR camera rig entity, and this was the same for the Core VR, so don't get confused, and I'm going to add that to our scene. All right, now you'll see the VR camera rig now exists in the entities panel. Now I'm going to change the transform to -90 for the y-axis, and I'm going to just move it back just a little bit. All right. Now, one of the reasons why the VR Asset Pack is the new kind of recommended way to do VR is that it makes it a lot easier to add grab capabilities, to add teleportation capabilities, and to add activation capabilities. So the three different capabilities that we're talking about are this. The teleportation is the ability to move around your scene. So when you click on a different part of the floor, if you want to call it a floor, you can then move your camera to that new spot. So you can, that's teleporting. You can also grab objects, and you could do this before with Core VR, but it's a little bit different now, so it uses icons. And so when you hover on something that is grabbable, you'll see a little hand icon indicating that this can be grabbed and picked up and moved. Now, those objects also need a collider entity, which is why we have a collider entity already attached to the game ball, for instance, which is what we're going to be grabbing. And you can also do, using the VR Asset Pack, you can also do things such as activate. Activate is the idea that when you click on something, you can make something happen. Like, for example, when I point my controller at the play button, I can click it, and then it'll emit a message that will start the scene. In the former video, and the other way we had done it, is that it's using a collider entity with a trigger enter action, so that when my hand or controller came within the vicinity of that object, it would then emit, or in a state machine behavior, it would emit a message. So that is one way to do it in Core VR, but in the VR Asset Pack, it's a lot easier to do the activate action or script, and we'll show you how to do that. All right, and so let's do a few things. Let's first add the teleportation to the ground. Now I'm going to select my ground entity, and I'm just going to add component and add a script to it. Now you notice there's three primary scripts here in the VR Asset Pack. I'm just going to take the teleport script and drag that onto the drop script input of my ground. And there we go. Now I can teleport on my ground. We'll see what that looks like once we enter our scene. All right, the next thing we want to do is add a grab capability to the game ball. So I'm going to click game ball. Similarly, I'm going to add component and then select a script, and then I'll find the grab script and add it to our script component. Now I can grab the ball and move it around. It's important, though, to know that it does have to have a collider entity attached to it, or collider component. And lastly, we want to be able to start the simulation by clicking the play button. And as I mentioned before, and the other way to do this, it's by touching it, really physically kind of touching it in your virtual world with your controller. Instead, if we just, again, add component, script, and activate. We're looking for the activate script. When I say activate and grab and teleport, just remember that over here it's VR action underscore activate and VR action object grab and so forth. Okay, so now the start button, I have a few options here. The input can be either hovering or hover enter or hover exit, on action button down or on action button up. I want to make it so that when I click down on the button, it emits a message. So I'm going to select on action button down. And now I can just, right here, I can emit a message. Now, if you remember before, when we created some of the state machine behaviors, we had emitted the message start. So we'll just emit that same message. And I'm also just going to remove the collider just to remove any complications or being able to grab it and move around the button, which would happen if it has a collider component. So I'm just going to remove that. Okay, and then is there anything else I need to do? I believe that is it. All right, now let's test our scene. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play my scene. I'm going to hit the enter VR button. I'll put on my headset and move things around. I'll narrate it a little bit. But one thing to note is that once I'm in the scene, I'm first going to be able to teleport around the scene. Then I will start the simulation by hovering or pointing my controller at the play button, pressing a button, and then the spheres, balls will start rolling towards me, and I will then move them into either the orange or the blue bucket. So let's test this out. One thing that I forgot to mention is that click on your VR camera rig, and over here in the inspector panel, under VR camera rig component, you want to select your current VR camera rig. So that'll make sure that it starts off in the location in which you have it set. All right, I'll press play. I'll enter VR. Now that I'm in VR, looking around, and as I point my controllers on the floor, you'll see the little man or figure icon that I can then that's indicating that this object is teleportable, and so I'm now teleporting around on the floor. I'll position myself back here, and notice then when I hover on the play button, I get this little activate icon, and I'll click that and then start the scene. And the game balls are starting to roll towards me, and you'll notice as they are getting closer, as they're actually really far away, I can grab them. So even when they're directly into the bucket, I can grab them, and then as they get closer and closer, of course, when I grab them closer to me, they will be easier to get into the bucket. We can change that, and we're going to fix that here in a little bit, just show you how to customize that. All right, so how do we change really the max distance of the pointers for our controllers? So as you noticed, I could grab the balls when they were like really far away from me, and that's fine. That might be okay, depending on what you want to accomplish. But we can change that in case you're interested. And so we'll go to VR camera rig over here in the entities panel. Then I'll go to VR pointer settings. And under script component, you'll notice that the max target distance is 10 units. That means that my pointers will reach a max distance of 10 units. I can change that to be something more like 3 units. And I can do that for the VR pointer primary and VR pointer secondary. I'll make it 3 for each. That means it'll now be a length of 3 units as far as it can reach. So let's test that out and see how that works now. Okay, I'm going to kind of step back from the front of the scene, or the front of the table, so you can kind of demonstrate how this distance thing works. And you notice as I point my controller at the ball, you don't see that active or the grab icon until it gets close enough within that max distance, or within that distance. And once it does, then I get the pointer or the grab icon. One thing that's important to note is that as you reduce the max distance for your pointers, that'll also change how far or how distant and how far you can actually teleport. So if I make the max distance like 0.1 so that it makes it so I can only grab it when it's really in the vicinity of my hand, that also means that I'm not going to be able to teleport any farther than 0.1 distance from my hand. So there is a give and take here, given the capabilities of using teleportation and grab and pointer distance and stuff. So that's something to keep in mind as you're building out your scenes. But other than that, feel free to go ahead and start experimenting with those different settings and seeing what works best for you. Just as a note, the full screen view that I was using to demonstrate when I was in VR, that was the Oculus mirroring ability that comes with the Oculus Rift, and so that is not a view that was directly in Sumerian, just as a heads up there. But if you have any questions, please let us know. But other than that, I hope you join us for our next video. Thank you.